Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Katleho Mushabani, and I am joining you from Johannesburg, South Africa. I am the moderator for today's digital dialogue. For the benefit of the participants who are blind or have visual impairment, all speakers will begin with a short self-description. So I will start. I am a Black male, fair complexion. I am wearing spectacles, which are rectangular. I have dreadlocks on the top of my head with shaved sides, and I am wearing a blue and green shirt that is checkered. Digital Dialogues is a series of panel discussions exploring civil society perspectives on the emerging digital world. The global economy is undergoing rapid digital transformation, reshaping industries, labor markets, and nature of work itself. While digital technologies hold significant potential for boosting productivity and economic growth, they also risk entrenching existing inequalities and excluding vulnerable groups from emerging opportunities. World leaders agreed that leveraging digital public infrastructure, also known as DPI, enhancing digital skills, and supporting human-centric approaches to AI and innovation would foster sustainable development that was envisaged in the SDG 8 goals. Today's digital dialogue will explore the practicalities of such political declarations and discuss how digital innovation and AI should contribute towards the objective of decent work for all. To guide us through today's session, I am delighted to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Ashraf Patel, Senior Research and Associate for Digital Economy at the Institute for Dialogue. Ashraf specializes in areas of digital economy, trade, and development justice in the Global South, ST and innovation, and 4IR and the future of work. We are also joined by Dr. August Alianek, an anthropologist and postdoctoral researcher in the Fair Work Project at the Oxford International Institute, that is OII, which is housed under the University of Oxford. He's Fair Work's leading researcher on AI and PBO. Extended bios will be dropped in the chat when each speaker will be providing their input. To start us off today, each panelist will introduce themselves and frame the issue by sharing the current landscape and key points around, and we'll then have a discussion and some questions. Don't forget to post your questions in the chat. We'll get them later on in the session. Ashraf, would you please turn on your camera and join me on screen?
Thank you, Katleho. Good afternoon, listeners. Thank you, team. It's a pleasure to be part of Digital Dialogues. Ashraf Patel, middle-aged professional based in Johannesburg, South Africa, wearing a brown shirt, glasses. Essentially, I have been in ICT for development, public policy, for the last 2.5 decades. We started out in the early 90s when there was Web 1.0. And of course, it evolved over the years into Web 2.0. And over the years, we've seen with convergence and digitalization has made the digital economy the backbone of both economy, society, politics, social life. And so that is my interest, the intersection between digital policy, trade, the world of work. And that is my kind of focus in my research. I also work a lot with my team members in the G20, in the Digital Economy Working Group, as well as the BRICS Digital Network Group, as well as working on Africa Union as they develop their digital society engagements. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Ashraf. You can now turn off your camera. I would like to welcome August to join me on screen. Good afternoon, August. Please turn on your camera, unmute yourself, and share your opening comments. Don't forget to begin with a short self-description.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation to be with you all today. I am Dr. Oz Alyanak. I am currently wearing a black shirt, recently shaved my head because it's summer, wearing spectacles, and I'm from Turkey. I'm a white man on screen. I'm an academic at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, working for the Fair Work project. I've been working with Fair Work as a postdoctoral researcher for the last almost 4.5 years now. I started after I graduated from my PhD in the US as an anthropologist. I was quite interested in workers' rights and workers' movements, which brought me to Fair Work research in Berlin, where my initial introduction was to the digital economy, looking at digital labor platforms in Germany. Some of them are multinational, the ones we know, such as Uber, Volt, Bolt, so delivery platforms or ride-hailing platforms. So I did the first year study, my first year at Fair Work, I did the research on the digital economy and digital labor platforms in Germany. And then after that, I joined University of Oxford's central research team at the Fair Work project to continue research not just in Germany, but also extending it to places like Belgium, France, later on to Morocco, Lebanon, Egypt, Kenya. So these are some of the countries where I led research teams working on the digital economy. And as of the last 2 years, I have been the lead researcher for our research stream on AI, with a specific interest in working conditions in BPOs. Those are business process outsourcing centers, basically sites where a lot of AI training, machine learning training is done. So for the last two years, I've been leading our research and doing assessments on a number of companies, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, East and West Africa, places like Kenya, which are big hubs for AI training, places like Uganda, Ghana more recently, but also in places that are traditionally known to be sites for BPOs, centers for BPOs, such as Philippines. So these are some of the new research sites that I'm engaged with and conducting research in. And for in the rest of my talk today, I will be sharing you some insights, both from my early days, my knowledge on digital economy, but also more recently on AI training sites and BPOs. And I look forward to a lively discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, August. We will now move on to the second part of today's dialogue and provide the opportunity for speakers to ask questions to one another based on their opening inputs. Ashraf, could you please turn your video back on and join me and August on screen? To ask each other questions and tease out the relationships and intersections in the current landscapes of your work, we will then move on to part two, the questions amongst panelists. Do any of the panelists have any questions or reactions to what you have just heard right now? I will start with questions from Ashraf for August to respond.
Yes, thank you for the introduction, August. I'm just reflecting on the new ILO, International Labour Organization, released the new guidelines on the gig workers. And this has been a process that has been in evolution for several years. And I just sort of, to kickstart the dialogue, have you had a view of the new gig economy guidelines from the ILO? and some initial thoughts.
Certainly. Of course, this is something, especially my colleagues that are working on the digital economy and gig work side of research are focusing on. And this is, of course, a welcome developments. We've been seeing in the last couple of years a number of initiatives similar to the ILO Convention findings. So one of them more recently was the EU Directive on Platform Work, for example, which we also worked heavily on. And these are, of course, important steps forwards in producing accountability for companies' practices um, to ensure that the promises of corporates and social responsibility are not just kept on paper, but also put into practice. This is also an important step, especially within the case of the digital economy, to recognize that there are there are workers that are employed in this economy. There are workers that are there training the AI or making this gig economy work. A lot of the things that, especially from the consumer side, that is taken for granted is that we do not necessarily get to interact or have the knowledge of or have the visibility of the very workers that make these new technologies possible. We talk about a future of work where a lot of things are internet or application based. We talk about a future of work where, or a future of humanity, to be honest, where a lot of things are provided through computers or through digital platforms. However, one thing to recognize is those those technologies have been developed by the work of the very workers that are sitting in BPOs, as I mentioned, business process outsourcing centers. These are basically places that used to be, for the most part, in the 80s and 90s, call centers. Many of them are now also working on projects such as data annotation and content moderation. But also workers that are, that are visible to the extent that when you, for example, order your food through an app or take a cab through one of the ride-hailing platforms, you get to interact, but your interaction often is limited to that. So it's very important for both the ILO, but also other similar due diligence initiatives that we've been seeing in the EU, the AI bill in the US, etc. So in some of these big AI consumer countries and continents. So it's very important to bring visibility. It's very important to highlight workers' presence, but also it's very important to recognize, and this is one of the things that the ILO is also pushing forth, to recognize that this economy should not just repeat a system of atomization, repeat a system of individualization of workers. And this is something that our research at Fair Work also has repeatedly shown over and over again, that this type of work, because it often takes place on the cloud, as we call it, like cloud work, online remote sites. You could be a worker that's in front of your computer working on these things, not even working among other workers in a site. So there's a lack of communication between workers that leads to atomization, which at the end leads to which leads to what we call a race to the bottom in economy, where rather than workers creating mechanisms of collective voice, end up being dispersed and spatially, so they don't have the opportunities to come together and then ask for better rights. So of course we do welcome these initiatives by international organizations and follow them very closely, both for recognizing what the workers already deserve, the visibility, but also the better rights and the better futures of work, but also taking the steps to make us think and to push us to make the companies that are in the AI sector or that are functioning, operating in digital economy accountable for their practices.
Thank you, August. So now what I will ask, I will just find out from you if you have any question for Ashraf.
Yes, I do have one question, and this is quite a nice opportunity for me to be in this actually meeting, because oftentimes, so Fair Work as a research project is a bit of an exception because we end up engaging with a lot of different stakeholders. So as an academic myself, in an academic research project, I like the possibility, the opportunity that's given to me to be able to have these engagements, not just produce academic articles and then hope that some people are going to read it. But I would like to ask Ashraf personally, how he, as a stakeholder in this room, but also a stakeholder in the wider world ecosystem of digital economy or AI, how he, as a civil society actor and representative, considers what he considers his contribution to be, and how he considers his interaction with different stakeholders taking different forms that could be useful for the very workers that are working in the digital economy itself.
Thank you for that question, August. In fact, within South Africa, universities are required and encouraged by government and stakeholders to create more critical dialogues and community engagement. And a lot of our research is around bringing together different stakeholder groupings in the big policy debates, whether it's social policy, energy and green policies, economic policy, etc. So within this context, we are part of the Think 20, which is the groups that produce research and policy briefs for the G20, as well as for BRICS and our outreach into Africa and Southern Africa. And there is an academic debate on what is called multi-stakeholderism. It has developed its own ideology, particularly at the UN level. And some of the critiques, the critical sociologists are questioning that model, whether it is really critical dialogues or co-option. I think that is a big debate amongst academics in Africa. Another big trend is what is called multilateralism, which is more a concept in international relations, in how different nations and their stakeholders can agree on critical issues, whether it's climate change or climate finance or labor rights. How do you integrate gender and youth in economic policy? And I think there is a quite a robust debate on bringing these voices together. Of course, the G20 is seen as quite an elitist forum, and there is a push by civil society to expand its voice. You have a civil 20, you have labor 20. How do we get those voices amplified? And our role merely as researchers is to provide the research and the content so that these more marginal groups can get a better voice on the big debates, be they G20, be it United Nations, etc., etc. So I would say our contribution is to strengthen the voices in policymaking, hopefully, so that the marginalized in society can get a better deal.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. I would like to encourage everybody that is in attendance to also drop your questions in the chat and also get involved so that we can have a very lively discussion and just explore this future of work, because it is something that might affect literally all of us, including me here as a facilitator. The next time we have this, it might be AI, and that also just affects the future of work. So in the interim, while we do not have any questions so far, what I would like to just ask is that August, would you please respond to Ashraf's statements? And if you have any further questions based on what he has said, you can also just explore that.
I mean, I agree, of course, with Ashraf, his statement. For me, I guess one of the challenges, so there are a few challenges that us as we as academics here do face. One of them is, of course, making our research translatable and accessible to everyone out there, including workers, especially workers. Because at Fair Work, one of the things that we remind ourselves of is research without producing action, research without producing impact, and in our case, pro-worker impact, is not really useful other than just creating knowledge. So knowledge has to have has to be translatable into action. So as researchers ourselves, that is the reason why not only do we work with other workers and include them in our research, not just to do interviews with them, but also to learn from them. We also try to take any opportunity possible to present our research findings in events like these, but also in many other venues where we are invited to talk about this future of work. One of the things, another thing that Ashraf has mentioned in this emphasis on multi-stakeholder approach. Now, it can be read as co-option, as as a sort of like way of giving in to. So, for example, to give you one example, in order for us to be able to create change through research, of course, we do talk to workers. We do learn from them what working conditions are like in the companies that they work for. We do we do talk to unions. We do talk to other worker advocacy groups, members of those worker advocacy groups, other researchers and journalists, to get a more holistic understanding of what really is going on in the different sites where AI is trained by workers. So in the BPOs, for example, in my case, or working conditions in these digital labor platforms, and for the workers that work in these digital labor platforms. However, we could just, like much of other research, we could just end research there and say, we have produced the knowledge that needs to be produced. We have understood, we have asked a question, that research question being, what are working conditions like in, let's say, this platform that we're studying, in platform X that we're studying. And platform X, not the Twitter X, in a platform that we're studying here. And we have done our research on it as academics, and here are our findings. And here is the way forward. We could provide some recommendations based on those findings. So we could make an assessment on whether something is fair or not based on the criteria, based on the principles that we use, and end it there. However, we don't, as action researchers, we do not like to end it there. What we try to do is to also go to the very companies, the platforms, or the BPOs, that these workers are employed at or are freelancing for. And we go and ask them to improve conditions based on our findings. So in a sense, we act within the capacity of an auditor, an independent critical auditor, but our methodology differs from auditors because we follow a research methodology as researchers, as academic ourselves. And we do talk to these platforms. We do talk to these companies. And in talking to them, we say, look, you can change some of these practices and policies that you have that could benefit thousands, hundreds and thousands of workers that you employ. And of course, one of the things we bring into the room is we give them assessments. These are public assessments. We give them a score out of 10 based on our findings. And that is where Fair Work pushes a step further to produce impact and to bring change, pro-worker change to the digital economy and for the thousands, if not millions of workers that are employed, because our research takes place in 40 different countries. So we do engage with a number of different platforms, a number of different companies, and thousands of workers. And some of these engagements, these multi-stakeholder engagements, some of these dialogues that we built with companies, of course, lead to changes in the company policy and practices that makes us very happy. Some of them don't lead to any changes, but as researchers, at the end of the year, we do publish publicly our findings and our research on the different platforms and different companies that we've done our research on, and put it out there to show the public this is what our assessment as critical researchers look like. If there are things from a company that needs to be cherished, if there are best practices that we like to highlight, we do highlight them. If there are bad practices, we also do highlight them for the public to know, to learn, and also for us to collectively, working with other stakeholders, such as civil society organizations, such as unions, collectively working with them to push for pro-worker change at the end.
Thank you very much, Okus. I would like for Ashraf to respond, but we do have some questions. And as for those that have attended, would know that we would like to have a hard stop at 5 p.m. Just so everybody could get a chance to also watch this on the YouTube channel when the recording is ready. So what I will do, we will circle back to you, Ashraf, but maybe I'll just start with the questions. So I'll start with when my colleague Rafa also put a question there and says, is there decent work for all, especially for young people? And if there is, how does that look like considering our current state and in our different contexts? So I will just go through the questions and then leave it for both of you to answer, sorry. The second question is, this is illuminating because it highlights what it takes to build the supply chain, allowing gig work, etc. My question is related to the systems that pay for gig work, usually based in industrially advanced countries, because financial systems there are more likely to support a global payment system. Does the research extend to the systems that pay gig work when those platforms work well? And that is a question from Mutoni Muriu. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And then another question, or the final question that we have, is from Suba Churchill, and it goes, whereas decent work for all has been used to refer to productive work in conditions of freedom, equity, security, and human dignity, encompassing fair wages, safe working conditions, social protection, and other opportunities for personal development and social integration. Kenyan domestic workers, mostly women, migrating to work in Gulf cooperation member countries have repeatedly raised concerns about unilateral changes to terms of contracts and, in some instances, ill treatment by employers, a situation that authorities in Kenya have always seem to not keen to confront, lest they hurt diplomatic relations with the affected countries. Are there any experiences or ideas in which digital innovation and AI can be deployed and used to develop early warning systems to enable such vulnerable groups to relay misgivings about abrupt changes in conditions of their working environment so that they can be rescued before things get out of hand, as well as it has always happened, and in some instances with fatalities? So those are our three questions. I will give Ashraf the opportunity to answer first, and then we'll follow with August.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those very relevant questions. In fact, Kenya is now ground zero for the kind of AI tech model. Remember, several years ago, it was a kind of poster child for big tech. We saw Mark Zuckerberg. His very first trip to Africa was both Kenya and Nigeria, and with a lot of fanfare, the big tech companies set up base. Remember, Kenya, together with Philippines and other South Asian nations, are the kind of sweatshops for content moderation and labeling. And over the years, many cases have come forward on the exploitative conditions of content moderators, especially in Kenya. And more recently, just last week, we've seen several news reports that both Samasource and Mizo workers, these are subcontractors to big tech, who then subcontract to gig workers in Kenya. And the stories are quite concerning, just on purely labor contractual issues. Not only are they gig workers, many of them have performed their duties, working remotely, using their own data, their own resources, their own equipment. And I just saw the article that they have not even been paid for the work that they have done. And now that is sitting with the courts. But it does point out to a major narrative, if you use critical technology studies or globalization studies, what we're seeing is big tech is now really extracting absolute value from the global south. Even though their shareholdings have increased, the billionaires have gotten richer and richer, and they're having very fancy weddings in Venice and all of these things. But at the end of the day, that value is extracted from the global south as well as the global north. And there is the race to the bottom. Why are they not being paid? That is for the Kenyan government, together with the companies that are outsourced to big tech. I think those agreements must be made transparent, number one. And there needs to be a campaign to ensure that there is fair pay for work that's being done. Remember, Kenya is going through a massive economic crisis, a cost of living crisis, year in, year out. I mean, for the last year, it has deepened. So this is why many scholars are referring to Kenya as the ground zero for big tech. It was advertised as a nirvana or an utopia, and now it's becoming a dystopian big tech ecosystem. So I think these are kind of critical questions to follow. And hopefully the ILO guidelines can provide a very solid framework, because most of the African nations sign on the ILO agreements, and that now needs to be implemented at the domestic level. And I think it's critical. We're at a critical point where there has to be some kind of campaign so that those workers do get paid. Many of them are not paid at this point in time.
Much, Ashraf. What I would like to do next is I would like to just hear Oguz's take on these questions and also from academia and research background. So Oguz, can you please take it away?
Okay, so let me start with the second question that was posed with regards to payment systems. That's not something we specifically focus on, but that's something that we bring into consideration in our analysis and assessment, especially within the context of what we call cloud work or online remote work platforms. These are platforms that anyone in this room can sign up for and do work for: translation, transcription, coding, software engineering, those kinds of things that you can basically just do from your living room. Of course, the money flow, as the person who has raised the question has rightly pointed out, is always global north to south. That is a lot of how the flow is within AI, within digital economy. That's there's a very colonial sort of like legacy that continues to this day and seeps into digital economy and AI, despite the fact that both digital economy and AI are proposed to us as freeing or as new means to bring development to the global majority or global south. So if you go to our principles under cloud work principles or online remote work principles, one of the things that you see there is a clause that says that workers can choose to be paid in a recognized national currency, or in whichever means they would like to be paid by, whichever currency or whichever platform they would like to use for getting paid. So that's something that we take into account. The other two questions, I'm going to try to bring them together. So decent work for all, it is an ideal, but just because it's an ideal, that does not make it a fantasy. Because if we think of it as this dream, then we are just gonna try to get to it as much as possible. What we do here at Fair Work is to push in any way and every way possible to reach there. So when you look at our rating system based on 0 to 10 points across 5 principles, so 5 principles, under each principles we have 2 thresholds, adding it all adds up to 10 points at the end. A company that gets a 10 out of 10, and out of the 700 company ratings that we have produced in the last 6 years, 700 ratings, only one company got a 10 out of 10. And that 10 out of 10 means that minimum standards of fairness are met. There's a lot more to be done. But what we then see is, out of those 700 ratings, 699 of them failed to produce even standards that would reach what we would consider at Fair Work as academics as a minimum standard of fairness. So that itself is alarming. Now, decence. If you talk to someone who's been unemployed for years, any kind of job that's going to bring them money, they see it as an opportunity. Does it make that job decent? Not necessarily, because that job, within my context, when I look at the BPO sector, that sites where AI training is done, Sama is one of the case studies that we looked at, and we are actually doing a repeat study this year as well. When you look at the BPO sector, one of the things that you see, sure, in a place like Uganda, in a place like Ghana, in a place like Kenya, where youth unemployment is off the charts. We know that. And yes, digital economy does provide employment opportunities. But then the question becomes, at what cost? Because if these employment opportunities come with insecure contracts, that is, contracts that may only be valid for a couple of months and may not be extended. Sure, they may come with payments, salaries that are above minimum wage, But no worker that you talk to is going to say getting just a little higher than minimum wage is enough to make a living in the countries that I mentioned to you, where I do research in. Sure, they are happy to be working for a company that has a big name. They're happy to be working for projects such as Meta, which Ashraf has mentioned. But once again, at what costs? What are the mental or psychological costs that such work brings? Data work, content moderation work. What are the costs that it brings? Also, what are you provided with similar employment benefits that you would get for the same job if you were to do it in any country in the global north? I'm not even talking about payments. I'm not talking about how much you're getting paid. I'm talking about your employment benefits, your access to sick leave, paid holidays, medical insurance. Some companies provide, some companies don't. So there are a lot of question marks that lead me to ask or to be critical when I think about decent as a term to describe this economy. Just because it provides employment opportunities for youth, just because it provides opportunities for what is considered digital literacy, which itself is a question mark too, because is data annotation sitting in a cubicle all day long providing you with digital literacy or digital upskilling? That's a big question mark as well. Just because these things are provided to you, does it make it decent? I have counter evidence to show that there are many other things that make it not decent or not fair. And these are things that we try to highlight when we do our analysis, and we try to convey to the management in the different companies that we bring into our study. If there are best practices that we learn from one company, we bring it to the others, to the attention of others, and say, look, your competitors are doing this. Why don't you? So yes, within the context of decency, we have to be considerate of not just digital economy or the AI BPO sector as a form or as a means of employment, but also at the conditions in which workers do the work and the benefits that they were provided with. Yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you very much, Okus. Maybe before we go to closing remarks, I will also ask a question. So what kind of resources, who are the best actors, and what are the right conditions for there to be work developed or work done towards achieving fair work for the workers in these various conditions and countries? I just wanted to find out what the ideal scenario would be to actually make progress and kind of start solving these problems. I will pose this question to both of you.
Should I go? Okay. Thank you for that question, Katejo. Look, in terms of the research on social dialogues, for instance, South Africa is an example. We have a chamber called the National Economic and Labor Chamber, Development Chamber. And it's a mandatory mechanism that has labor, government, business, and it has a civil society chamber. And they meant to discuss major changes in economic and labor policy. And that seems to have been working for at least 25 years in South Africa. But in the last several years, with the fourth industrial revolution and AI, it is also becoming weaker. But it still exists. And as per Labor Relations Act, and many sector legislations, as well as the ILO convention. So that is a repository of the implementation of all the ILO conventions. It needs to be implemented and discussed. There are bargaining councils, for instance, where there is debate, but that is happening in the industrial sectors, mining, manufacturing, etc. but the gig economy is still not established. Um, and maybe that is one way to begin to formalize it. Going back to the old school industrial relation system mechanisms. I'm not saying at an industry level. I'm saying those mechanisms ensured social protection. And I think the big issue here is social protection for gig economy in the era of AI, and how we can ensure that those forums or mechanisms are there, agreements are signed and then implemented. And if they are not adhered to, then the court system can come in. So that would be the first level to protect the gig workers. Because remember, the platforms and the big tech are super profitable. And there's no reason why they cannot pay a decent wage. Perhaps the challenge is these intermediary organizations like Sama and others that are kind of taking a larger chunk of the value of labor, and that's not transparent. Maybe more research should be done at that level. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. I'll just also allow August to answer the question.
Sure. I mean, as Ashraf mentioned, the intermediary level, yes, we do the research on them and we publish on them. But the intermediary level is also so much dependent on that upper level that provides the projects, that just by telling a story of what working conditions are like in Sama or any other firm, any other BPO that does engage in content moderation, data annotation work, and take on projects from the likes of ByteDance, from the likes of Meta. So these are big AI firms, technology firms out there. Just by looking at the middle level, we are missing the upper sort of like the very force at the top that holds the strings, and that can actually bring change. For that reason, we are now, one of the things we're trying to do at Fairwork is to propose an initiative, a certification scheme for the lead firms, for the suppliers themselves. So not just go to one BPO that's at the middle level, but to go to the very top and ask them to provide us with access to evaluate the entire supply chain itself. This is, of course, a very ambitious approach, but we have the human resources. Hopefully, we will have the human resources and the means to be able to engage in this very soon. So that's very important to us in terms of to not lose the ties between the different levels, from workers to the BPOs or the middle level companies to the lead firms. But just to end, one of the things that always keeps me very hopeful since the very first day I started this research back in, as I mentioned earlier, back in Germany, is change comes from sure, it can come from top down through policy. That's something that we can never forego. It has to come from top down as well. But it has to also come from bottom up. What that means is workers have to be empowered to be able to raise their voices and raise their concerns in a collective fashion. What that means is, if you're a single worker working for a company, and if you didn't get paid last month, if you go out to the streets and say, I did not get paid last month, this company is not treating me well, next thing you know, you're going to find yourself kicked out. But if you are a group of workers that have the power in numbers, as the saying goes, right, to be able to bring change, then that is very influential, because then with that kind of like grassroots movements starts attention being paid by all other actors around you. This includes media. This includes us, researchers, that get to read about what's happening in different companies. This includes other worker advocacy groups. This includes eventually unions that decide to support these grassroots activists, worker activism, activist movements. And eventually it trickles up all the way to the policy level. The reason why we are now having these big meta level, right? Negotiations at the level of ILO, at the level of UN, at the level of EU, is because workers have said enough. We need better working conditions. We cannot be getting paid below minimum wage. We cannot be dealing with physical and psychological constraints of this kind of job. We cannot be dealing with insecure contracts year after year. And eventually, the public and policy world started paying attention. So, two things, I guess, to wrap up. First, we have to be inclusive of different levels of analysis, because the top level of analysis, where the projects are being outsourced to middle level companies, is super important, and they have to be accountable for their practices. They also set the agenda for a lot of policies and practice at the middle level. Second, bottom up, grassroots activism. We have to be always listening to what the workers are saying. That's our priority at Fair Work. We listen to workers first and foremost. If workers tell us a story that things are not fair, practice and policies are not fair, that is what we take as our evidence and bring forward in our writing and in our dialogue with company managements.
Very much, Okus. I think before we just do the wrap up, I just wanted to go through these comments. I think they also add to our closing remarks. We have Leah Wanjiru, who says, I resonate with these points shared. As a former worker in the PBOs sector in Kenya in my prime years, I can attest that the decent mentioned in paper is not the decent that applies to the contract. There's exploitation of cheap labor for youth in the job market. Call to action, we need advocates in the PBO sector to fight for the rights of our youth and labor laws. I am happy to contribute into the ongoing research in the Kenyan context. And then the email is there for you to just do a follow-up. And then we also have another response from Mutoni Muiru, who says, I think it will be difficult to expand the definition of decent from providers and platforms in one jurisdiction to another with different labor laws. Unlike the ICC and the WTO, there's no international labor court or arbitration for gig workers in providing countries. With TaskRabbit in the US, you can take the provider to civil court if they don't pay you. Working from Kenya, no recourse as they have no jurisdiction. So in just closing, I just wanted to also mention that it does appear that fighting for fair work in the future of work in the gig economy in the digital space seems to be an ongoing affair, that we are glad that there are institutions and individuals such as yourself, August, such as yourself, Ashraf, that are working towards the reality of fair pay being, making it a reality for everybody. So with that, I would just like to conclude today's proceedings. Thank you very much for attending, everybody. I just want to start by thanking our speakers, Ashraf and Ogus, for an incredibly insightful discussion, as well as our sign language interpreters and the captioner for their tireless work throughout today's session. I would like to also thank Ryan, who has been managing the comments and also admitting everybody in, as well as both teams from the ICSC as well as the Civic Tech Innovation Network. I just want to say thank you for today and for your engagement. Please note that next month, there will not be a digital dialogue as we take a summer break, which is winter for us in the Global South, but also taking that break, that much needed rest. The series will return on Thursday, the 4th of September at 4 o'clock CEST. So please save the date. Thank you and goodbye.